German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt visited the site and began digging. They realized what was really at this site.
We go down.
We thought we knew how human civilization began, until one man stared into the dirt of a barren Turkish hilltop and realized we had the entire story backwards. Before his sudden death in 2014, archaeologist Klaus Schmidt uncovered a massive subterranean world that predates the pyramids by 6,000 years. But what he found buried beneath Gobekli Tepe wasn't just ancient stone. It was a terrifying rewrite of human history itself. What secret did he take to his grave? The underground revelations. The local Turkish shepherds called it Potbelly Hill, a barren, windswept mound rising above the Harran Plain, littered with broken limestone blocks and an endless carpet of sharp flint shards. For decades, mainstream academics ignored it, dismissing the site as nothing more than an abandoned medieval cemetery. But when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt first stepped onto that dry Anatolian dirt in October 1994, he didn't see a graveyard. With decades of trained field experience behind him, Schmidt instantly recognized the telltale signature of pre-pottery flint tools. He knew right away that whoever shaped those stones hadn't lived hundreds of years ago. They had lived over 10,000 years ago. Schmidt grabbed a spade and began to dig. What he pulled out of the earth shocked the archaeological world, but what he discovered just beneath the surface before his sudden death in 2014 changed our understanding of human prehistory forever. During his first few excavation seasons, Schmidt's small team cleared away centuries of soil to reveal massive circular stone enclosures. Ring after ring of megalithic limestone monoliths emerged from the earth, each framed by colossal T-shaped pillars standing up to 18 feet tall and weighing anywhere from 10 to 50 tons. These weren't crude, thrown-together slabs of fieldstone. They were meticulously carved, highly polished architectural marvels adorned with intricate, high-relief sculptures of lethal predators, scorpions, crouching lions, slithering snakes, and vultures hovering over headless human figures. Yet, despite 2 decades of backbreaking labor, Schmidt had only scraped the modern surface. By the time of his death, less than 5% of the entire site had been physically excavated by hand. Realizing that digging the entire 22-acre mound would take generations, Schmidt turned to cutting-edge subsurface imaging. He brought in geophysical survey teams to run extensive ground-penetrating radar and high-resolution geomagnetic scans across the hilltop. What those subterranean radar scans revealed was nothing short of staggering. Beneath the quiet, unexcavated dirt lay a vast, sprawling megalithic complex hidden entirely from view. The radar pulses bounced back data showing at least 16 to 20 additional massive stone circles buried deep within the earth. Trapped within those subterranean rings were over 200 individual T-shaped pillars, standing in silent, concentric formation directly below the feet of the archaeologists. The scans proved that Gobekli Tepe wasn't just a single isolated shrine or a temporary gathering spot. It was a massive, interconnected ceremonial center built, modified, intentionally filled in, and rebuilt over a span of more than 1,500 years, from roughly 9,600 BCE to 8,000 BCE. To put that temporal scale into perspective, the site was already ancient and buried long before the first stone was laid at Stonehenge, and thousands of years before the first mud brick was dried to construct the Great Pyramids of Giza. Schmidt's underground revelation was clear. What lay buried beneath the surface was an architectural footprint so massive, so technologically demanding, and so impossibly old that it shattered every existing timeline of human development. The hunter-gatherers of the Stone Age weren't just surviving in small, primitive bands. They were organizing, planning, and engineering subterranean marvels on a scale never before imagined. So how could hunter-gatherers, armed with nothing but flint tools, move 50-ton blocks of stone before the wheel was even invented? The paradigm shift. For over a century, the history of human progress followed a single, unquestioned gospel. It was a neat, linear story taught in every classroom on Earth. First came the Ice Age, then humans learned to farm. Agriculture allowed us to build permanent villages. permanent villages created a division of labor. And eventually, once our bellies were full and our societies were organized, we finally had the luxury to invent religion, build temples, and construct grand monuments. Bread came first. The gods came later. Klaus Schmidt's discovery at Gobekli Tepe completely shattered that foundational narrative. When Schmidt analyzed the layers of soil surrounding the massive stone circles, he looked for the basic markers of permanent human settlement. He searched for domesticated crops like wheat or barley, for livestock pens, for permanent hearths, and for private residential homes. He found none of them. There were no homes, no storage silos, no wells, and no evidence of farmed grains. The hundreds of thousands of animal bones strewn across the site belonged entirely to wild beasts. Gazelles, aurochs, wild boars, and red deer all hunted from the surrounding plains. The people who engineered, carved, and erected these multi-ton monoliths were not settled farmers living in comfortable villages. They were nomadic hunter-gatherers. This realization forced Schmidt to formulate a revolutionary thesis that turned modern anthropology upside down. First came the temple, then the city. It wasn't agriculture that forced humans to settle down and build places of worship. It was the irresistible desire to worship together that forced us to invent agriculture. Imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of the site. Hundreds of nomadic hunter-gatherers had to gather at this precise hilltop to quarry, carve, and haul 50-ton limestone monoliths out of the bedrock. They had no draft animals, no metal tools, and no wheels. To keep hundreds of workers fed over months of grueling manual labor, relying purely on hunting wild game became mathematically impossible. The pressure to feed the massive labor forces assembling at Göbekli Tepe created an urgent, unprecedented demand for food. Schmidt argued that this exact pressure forced the surrounding bands to begin experimenting with wild grasses in the nearby Karakada Hills, the very place where geneticists have traced the origin of all modern domesticated einkorn wheat. Religion was not the final byproduct of human civilization. It was the primary engine that sparked it into existence. By placing spiritual assembly before survival, Schmidt's work altered our core understanding of human nature. We were not driven out of the wilderness purely by climate change or hunger, but by a powerful, shared psychological imperative to connect with the divine, map the cosmos, and honor the dead. The implications were dizzying. Our ancestors possessed complex social hierarchies, abstract theological systems, and deep engineering capabilities thousands of years before anyone planted the first crop. The anomaly of the T-pillars and artistry. Step into one of the excavated enclosures at Gobekli Tepe, and you are immediately surrounded by giant stone sentinels that seem to stare silently down at you. These are not simple geometric support beams meant to hold up a roof. They are something far more eerie, calculated, and deeply artistic. When Klaus Schmidt carefully cleared the packed dirt away from the central monoliths, he realized that every single T-shaped pillar was actually a stylized, faceless human figure frozen in limestone. Look closely at the architecture of a central pillar, and the anatomy becomes uncomfortably clear. The horizontal crossbar at the top forms a stylized head, viewed from the side, devoid of eyes, nose, or mouth. A deliberate decision to render these beings faceless. The vertical shaft represents the torso. Down the sides of the stone, long, slender arms are carved in low relief, sweeping downward toward the waist where delicate, long-fingered hands meet just above a carved belt buckle. Suspended from these belts are detailed loincloths carved from fox pelts. These weren't representations of ordinary mortals. Standing up to 18 feet tall, twice the size of a human, they represented powerful ancestors, deities, or supernatural beings who ruled over the spirit world of the Stone Age. Even more staggering than the figures themselves is the mastery of the stonework. Remember, the craftsmen who created these monuments had no bronze chisels, no iron hammers, and no steel blades. Every single millimeter of stone was carved using hard flint obsidian blades and river pebble hammerstones. Yet, despite these primitive tools, the relief work at Göbekli Tepe rivals the stone carving of classical antiquity. Rather than simply scratching lines into the rock, These ancient masons routinely carved away inches of surrounding limestone bedrock just to leave animals standing out in dramatic, high-relief, three-dimensional form. And what animals they were! The pillars form a dark, dangerous menagerie of the late Pleistocene wilderness. Angry, snarling boars expose razor-sharp tusks. Crouching leopards prepare to pounce. Highly detailed scorpions, venomous spiders, and coiled snakes crawl across the stone surfaces, looking as though they might spring off the pillar at any moment. On Enclosure D's famous Pillar 43, often called the Vulture Stone, a large vulture holds a circular disc on its outstretched wing, while a headless human body lies sprawling beneath it. Schmidt noted that these animals were not peaceful livestock or food sources like gazelles and wild sheep. They were lethal, venomous, and predatory. The iconography was designed to project raw power, danger, and threshold defense. It suggests a complex spiritual world focused on protection against dark forces, shamanic journeys, and perhaps rituals surrounding death and the afterlife. This wasn't primitive cave art scribbled on a wall after a successful hunt. This was deliberate, highly structured narrative iconography created by master artisans who had inherited centuries of artistic tradition.
6,000 years earlier than Stonehenge, and yet somehow our ancestors were capable of making this. This is Göbekli Tepe.
The spatial layout was meticulous. Twin giant pillars always occupied the center of every circle, turned to face each other like priests presiding over a congregation, encircled by smaller perimeter pillars embedded in surrounding stone walls. The complete absence of domestic hearths, cooking pits, storage jars, or nearby natural water sources confirmed Schmidt's grand hypothesis. Nobody lived here. Gobekli Tepe was a regional cathedral of the ancient world, a sacred mountaintop destination where dispersed nomadic clans traveled from hundreds of miles away to participate in terrifying, awe-inspiring rituals under the watchful eyes of stone gods. But the most disturbing mystery isn't how they built Göbekli Tepe, it's why they buried it. The mystery of the deliberate burial. As Klaus Schmidt's spade cut deeper into the central enclosures, he ran into an architectural phenomenon that defied all conventional archaeological logic. Usually, when an ancient building is abandoned, it slowly crumbles over centuries. Wind-blown dust accumulates, roofs collapse inward, and nature gradually reclaims the stone. At Gobekli Tepe, that isn't what happened. The massive stone rings of Layer 3 were deliberately filled in by human hands. Schmidt discovered that once a stone circle reached the end of its active life cycle, or perhaps when a specific astronomical or spiritual epoch concluded, the builders didn't just walk away. They methodically buried the entire structure under thousands of tons of dense, imported fill. They brought in massive quantities of limestone gravel, flint debris, and dirt, packing it tightly into the enclosures until the giant T-shaped pillars were completely submerged beneath the earth. This was an astronomical, logistical undertaking in its own right. Filling in a single 20-meter stone circle required hauling roughly 300 cubic meters of soil, gravel, and stone. To do this repeatedly over 1,500 years meant that burying these temples took nearly as much labor as building them in the first place. Why would a society pour countless hours of backbreaking labor into creating grand monuments to their gods, only to deliberately cover them up and construct a new ring directly beside or over the old one? Schmidt hypothesized that the act of burial was itself a core spiritual ritual, a ritualized death and rebirth of the sanctuary. Just as a human body is buried in the earth at the end of its life, the sacred space had to be entombed before a fresh, untainted enclosure could be raised to take its place. Inside this intentional fill, Schmidt unearthed even stranger clues. Mixed among the rock rubble were hundreds of thousands of butchered animal bones, primarily wild gazelles, aurochs, and wild boars, indicating that massive communal feasting accompanied these burial ceremonies. But scattered right alongside the animal remains were fragmented human skulls. These human skull fragments showed deliberate post-mortem modifications. They bore deep, carved vertical grooves cut into the bone using sharp flint blades, along with drilled holes near the top of the cranium. Schmidt's team realized they were looking at the earliest known physical evidence of a prehistoric skull cult. The builders of Gobekli Tepe were exhuming, carving, hanging, and displaying the skulls of their dead ancestors or defeated enemies within these buried sanctuaries as part of a complex ancestor worship ritual. The deliberate burial of Gobekli Tepe acted as a time capsule. By packing the structures with earth, the ancient builders inadvertently protected the exquisite stone reliefs from thousands of years of wind, rain, freeze-thaw cycles, and human vandalism. The very act meant to seal away their sacred spaces is the exact reason Klaus Schmidt was able to find them perfectly preserved 11 millennia later. An archaeological reality. Whenever archaeology stumbles across something genuinely extraordinary, the modern internet engine immediately goes into overdrive. Göbekli Tepe became the ultimate playground for sensationalist late-night television, alternative historians, and viral conspiracy creators. Titles flashing online claimed that Klaus Schmidt had uncovered proof of Atlantis, evidence of an extraterrestrial landing pad, or a secret ancient map predicting the end of the world. When Schmidt unexpectedly died of a heart attack in 2014, the rumor mill spun out of control, claiming he was silenced because he was on the verge of exposing an inconvenient truth. The cold, hard archaeological reality is far different and, frankly, much more impressive. Schmidt wasn't hiding anything in a vault. Every excavation diary, every soil analysis, and every survey map generated by his team was meticulously documented and published in peer-reviewed scientific journals by the German Archaeological Institute. When fringe theorists claim that primitive humans couldn't possibly have carved these megaliths without high-tech lasers or anti-gravity levitation, they ignore the physical evidence left behind in the dirt. Archaeologists at Göbekli Tepe didn't just find giant stones, they unearthed over 300,000 worked flint tools, blades, scrapers, arrowheads, and heavy stone hammerstones scattered right beside the unfinished pillars in the nearby limestone quarry beds. The tool marks on the T-pillars match the precise strike angles of these flint tools. The ancients didn't need acoustic levitation or alien assistance. They used sheer brute force, clever wooden lever physics, and thousands of hours of collective human sweat. Then there is the myth of the lost advanced empire. If an advanced spacefaring or seafaring civilization built Gobekli Tepe, they left behind none of their signature markers. There are no refined metals, no written records, no fired ceramics, and no evidence of wheel marks. The people who assembled at this hill were unambiguously Stone Age hunter-gatherers, living off wild game and foraging wild plants. Recent re-evaluations under current excavation director Dr. Lee Clare have even challenged Schmidt's classic intentional burial theory. Modern soil stratigraphy shows that while some structures were certainly backfilled intentionally with cultural debris, parts of the mound were also filled by natural slope slides and landslides over centuries of torrential post-glacial rainfall. Pseudoscience steals the credit from our actual ancestors. Attributing Gobekli Tepe to external magic or lost superstitions cheapens the genuine genius of early humans. The real story isn't that visitors from the stars built a temple in Turkey. It's that our supposedly primitive Stone Age grandfathers possessed the intelligence, social organization, and artistic vision to build a masterpiece out of raw mountain bedrock using nothing but sharp flint rocks. The man behind the spade. Behind every world-altering discovery stands a human being whose peculiar obsessions and quiet dedication made it possible. For Gobekli Tepe, that man was Dr. Klaus Schmidt. Long before his name became synonymous with the world's oldest temple, Schmidt was a soft-spoken, intensely focused German archaeologist whose colleagues described him as a scholar of exceptional instinct, endless patience, and unyielding intellectual honesty. Born on December 11, 1953, in the small historic town of Feuchtwangen in Franconian Bavaria, Schmidt grew up surrounded by European history. His passion for the deep past manifested early. He pursued his higher education at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg and later at the prestigious Heidelberg University, earning his doctorate in prehistoric archaeology and geology in 1983. While many of his academic peers gravitated toward the glamour of classical Greece, classical Rome, or Pharaonic Egypt, Schmidt was magnetically drawn to the raw, uncharted wilderness of the Stone Age, specifically the Epipaleolithic and early pre-pottery Neolithic periods of the Near East. He didn't want to decipher established dynasties. He wanted to peer into the dark, silent millennia before human written language existed. Schmidt's connection to Anatolian soil was both professional and deeply personal. During his decades of field research in southeastern Turkey, he met Dr. Çiğdem Köksal, a brilliant Turkish archaeologist who shared his passion for prehistory. The two married and formed a formidable scientific partnership. Rather than living in isolated academic quarters, the couple fully immersed themselves in the local culture of Şanlıurfa, the ancient city near Göbekli Tepe. They purchased a traditional, centuries-old stone house in Urfa's historic center, turning its sprawling courtyard into the official research headquarters for the German Archaeological Institute's excavation team. Friends and colleagues remembered Schmidt not as an ivory tower academic, but as a hands-on field director who spent 12-hour days covered in fine limestone dust alongside his Turkish workmen.
So we are here on top of a limestone ridge, and it's not a place for settlements. We didn't expect it, and also our excavation results.
He was known for his calm, approachable demeanor, always ready to share a glass of Turkish tea with local villagers, journalists, or visiting scholars, while patiently explaining the significance of a newly uncovered stone relief. Yet behind his quiet warmth was an exhausting, unrelenting work ethic. Schmidt drove himself mercilessly. Managing a high-profile excavation of this scale meant balancing delicate international diplomacy, complex administrative paperwork, scientific publishing, and constant fundraising, all while supervising delicate physical excavations under the scorching summer sun of the Harran Plain. In interviews, he jokingly referred to himself as a slave of Gobekli Tepe, acknowledging that the sheer magnitude of the site had consumed his life completely. On July 20, 2014, the world of archaeology was hit with a devastating shock. While vacationing off the Baltic coast of Germany, Klaus Schmidt suffered a sudden, fatal heart attack while swimming. He was just 60 years old. He died at the height of his career, leaving behind an unfinished masterpiece of excavation. But he also left behind an indelible legacy. He had taken an obscure, forgotten hilltop on the edge of the Mesopotamian plain and turned it into the central anchor of world prehistory. Göbekli Tepe wasn't Schmidt's first brush with the Stone Age. His instincts were honed on lost worlds that came before. The forgotten trial grounds. When Klaus Schmidt recognized the revolutionary nature of Göbekli Tepe in 1994, it wasn't a lucky stroke of beginner's fortune. It was the culmination of 2 decades spent digging through the dust of Anatolia, learning the silent language of prehistoric stone tools. Schmidt's journey into the deep prehistory of the Near East began in the late 70s at Nurşantepe, an ancient mound in the upper Euphrates basin. Working on his doctoral thesis between 1976 and 1982, Schmidt analyzed thousands of tiny lithic artifacts, flint arrowheads, stone blades, and obsidian flakes. While cataloging microflints might sound tedious to an outsider, it was precisely this rigorous work that taught Schmidt how to read stone like a written book. He learned to distinguish a piece of rock shaped by human hands thousands of years ago from one broken by a farmer's plow. However, the crucial stepping stone toward Gobekli Tepe came in the 80s at a site named Nivali Kori. Located on a terrace above the Euphrates River, Nivali Kori was an early pre-pottery Neolithic settlement dating back to roughly 8,400 BCE.
Unfortunately drowned one of the most important. It's a place called Nivali Chori, and this dated to around 8,000 to 8,500 BC.
Schmidt worked as a core member of the excavation team under his academic mentor, Professor Harald Hauptmann from Heidelberg University. It was a high-stakes, race-against-time salvage project. The entire site was slated to be permanently submerged under the rising reservoir waters of the new Ataturk Dam. What Hauptmann and Schmidt uncovered at Nivali Kori shocked the archaeological establishment of the 80s. In the middle of a small agricultural village, they unearthed a distinct rectangular cult building made of stone. Set into the stone benches of this shrine were two central, freestanding T-shaped limestone pillars carved in low relief with human arms and hands, surrounded by limestone sculptures of human heads and mythical beasts. It was a light bulb moment for young Klaus Schmidt. Navali Kori provided the first undeniable physical proof that pre-pottery Neolithic societies were carving monumental anthropomorphic pillars. Sadly, by 1991, the rising waters of the Ataturk Dam swallowed Navali Kori, hiding its prehistoric stone temple beneath hundreds of feet of water. But while the site was lost to the Euphrates, the image of those carved T-pillars remained burned into Klaus Schmidt's memory. He knew that Navali Kori couldn't have been an isolated anomaly. There had to be other, perhaps older sites somewhere in the surrounding limestone hills. Equipped with the visual key he had inherited from Navali Kori, Schmidt set out to survey the region. When he arrived at Göbekli Tepe in October 1994 and saw broken limestone blocks sticking out of the dirt, he didn't see medieval gravestones as previous researchers had reported in 1963. He recognized the distinct tops of T-shaped pillars identical to those lost beneath the dam waters. Only these were vastly larger, far older, and far more numerous. Navali Kori had been the proving ground. It was the crucial dress rehearsal that allowed Klaus Schmidt to instantly identify the greatest archaeological puzzle of the 21st century the moment he laid eyes on it. He had spent 20 years training his eyes for a single moment, and it ended all too soon. The Modern Era and the Taş Tepeler Project. When Klaus Schmidt passed away so unexpectedly in the summer of 2014, the archaeological world held its collective breath. For 2 decades, Göbekli Tepe had been inextricably tied to his personal vision, endless energy, and sharp field instincts. Many wondered if the monumental excavation would stall out or lose momentum without its charismatic leader. Instead, Schmidt's sudden absence catalyzed a massive institutional transition. The baton was passed to a new generation of international scholars and Turkish specialists, most notably Dr. Lee Clare of the German Archaeological Institute, who stepped in to oversee long-term preservation and continued scientific analysis. Under modern management, Göbekli Tepe transitioned from a remote, dusty excavation trench into a world-class archaeological park. The Turkish government, recognizing the site's immense cultural and historical value, invested heavily in site infrastructure. A massive, state-of-the-art protective canopy, resembling a giant aerodynamic white umbrella, was engineered and installed over the main excavated enclosures. This high-tech protective roof successfully shields the fragile 11,000-year-old limestone reliefs from the brutal Anatolian sun, severe winter freezing rain, and destructive wind-driven erosion that long threatened to degrade the soft, intricate carvings. Furthermore, Göbekli Tepe's global profile skyrocketed. In 2018, UNESCO officially inscribed the site onto its World Heritage List.
UNESCO World Heritage Sites Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe were built around the same time, and they were buried in a similar manner,
cementing its status as one of the most important cultural landmarks on Earth. This recognition brought a massive surge of international tourism, transforming sleepy Şanlıurfa into a bustling hub for global archaeology enthusiasts. Millions of visitors now walk along elevated wooden pathways, looking down into ancient enclosures where Stone Age hunter-gatherers once gathered in the dark to honor their dead, share massive feasts, and commune with their gods. Advanced radiocarbon dating, micromorphology, and organic residue analysis on newly unearthed artifacts continue to yield daily breakthroughs. Researchers are actively mapping out ancient climatic shifts during the late Pleistocene, providing crucial context on why these early nomadic communities sought profound spiritual solace during periods of extreme environmental stress and ecological transformation. Yet, the most significant modern development isn't just the protection of Göbekli Tepe itself. It is the launch of the ambitious Taş Tepeler project, spearheaded by the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism alongside international teams. This regional initiative expanded excavation efforts across the entire province of Şanlıurfa. Archaeologists realized that Göbekli Tepe was never an isolated anomaly standing alone in an empty landscape. The mystery Klaus Schmidt unlocked on that lonely hilltop was merely the opening chapter of a much larger, sweeping archaeological revolution that continues to completely redefine our understanding of human civilization today, proving that spirituality built our world. The sister sites. If Gobekli Tepe was the spark that ignited a new paradigm in human prehistory, its newly excavated sister sites are the roaring fire confirming its truth. Chief among these discoveries is Karahan Tepe, located just 40 miles east on the arid plateau of the Tek Mountains. First identified during regional surveys and intensively excavated in recent years under the Taş Tepeler initiative, Karahan Tepe is proving to be even older, larger, and more elaborate in some respects than Göbekli Tepe itself. Walking through the carved bedrock chambers of Karahan Tepe feels like stepping directly into a surreal prehistoric dreamscape. Archaeologists have uncovered dozens of T-shaped monolithic pillars, subterranean rock-cut ritual chambers, and astonishing high-relief sculptures carved straight into the living stone of the earth. Most famous among these is a dramatic human head sculpture emerging directly from a bedrock wall, complete with striking facial features, a bearded chin, and deep-set eyes that stare across 11 millennia. Other enclosures feature snake motifs and ritual water channels that hint at complex baptismal or cleansing ceremonies performed by ancient Stone Age shamans. The existence of Karahan Tepe completely vindicates Klaus Schmidt's most daring theoretical assertions. Critics had long argued that Gobekli Tepe might have been an isolated freak construction project, an exceptional outlier built by a unique group of people. But sites like Karahan Tepe, along with neighboring mounds like Bonkuklu Tarla, Sayburç, and Harbet Suvan Tepesi, prove that monumental stone architecture was part of a widespread, highly organized regional culture. Long before cities, empires, or written words existed, a vast network of hunter-gatherer communities shared a unified religious worldview, a sophisticated engineering language, and an intense drive to shape their spiritual reality into solid stone. This is the true, enduring legacy of Dr. Klaus Schmidt. He was not just an archaeologist who found some old stones in the dirt of southeastern Turkey. He was the man who shattered the comfortable linear illusion of human history. Klaus Schmidt did not live to see the full scope of the empire of stone he helped uncover, nor could he have predicted how quickly his radical ideas would become mainstream dogma. Yet every time a new trench is opened at Karahan Tepe, every time a radar pulse maps another buried circle, and every time a modern traveler stands in awe beneath the protective canopy of Potbelly Hill, Schmidt's restless spirit is right there in the dirt. The past is no longer a silent void. Thanks to one man's relentless spade and visionary mind, it speaks to us in everlasting stone. Subscribe to our channel for more.